Joined now by TSN hockey analyst, former Vancouver Canuck, Mr. Frank Corrado, back after a week's holiday from the show. How we doing?
Very good. Very good. I feel refreshed. I feel rejuvenated. Like you guys throw the hard hitting questions at me. So
Oh,
I just
right.
needed a week to just kind of like reset. So I feel good
Right.
now. I'm fresh.
Yeah. We learned yesterday from Pierre LeBrun that the Brock Boeser trade interest just still isn't there. And it's looking like, and Brock even said to Canucks management on his way out of here in April, that he'd be happy to come back. You tell me, Frank, a guy who basically requests a trade, his agent tries to shop him for months, there's no interest, and then an about face, and he wants back. Tell me about the dynamic, how that may work with the room.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think when things aren't going well for you as a player, it's hard not to look around and think, well, maybe a different situation would feel better for me and I could do well there. The issue, and I'm sure you guys talk about this all the time, is his contract is not an easy one to move. And I think a lot of teams, if they're going to absorb that kind of contract, you're not necessarily looking at a team that's looking to win. Like they have players making that kind of money already that probably contribute a little more to their team. So why are you going to take that on? As far as Brock Boeser, the player goes, like we know how he can score goals and all that kind of stuff. But if he could play with like a little more like of an engine, it would go a long way for him. Like it really would. It was funny, like talking to Bruce Boudreau at Trade Center and kind of picking his brain about the Canucks and what seemed to be the issues there and certain players and stuff. And, one of the things that we both kind of talked about with Brock Boeser was like, there's something there. Like there really is. If he could find half a step, like that would be the best thing for the Canucks because you signed him, you have him, it could solve a problem for you. And maybe that's something that he comes back and does this summer. Like it's not out of the question for players to go back, have a really good summer, feel like they're refreshed, rejuvenated, and come back and gain half a step. Like it does happen. The challenge after that would be, can it happen and can you sustain it? Like I saw that this year a little bit with John Tavares, where I thought he was really slowing down and it wasn't going to get any better for him. And he came back this year. He kind of found half a step. Towards the end of the season, it seemed like it tailed off. Can Brock Boeser do that for the whole year? And if he can, you're talking about a player with an excellent shot, an ability to score goals, but he just gets to where he needs to go like a half second sooner. And that's going to make all the difference for him to get that shot off.
How does a player find a half a step this deep into their career?
I would say it's got to be in the gym a certain degree. Like you need to find a way to get a little more explosive. So if you were a player that did a lot of like long distance stuff, you were into like cardio and you rode the bike for long periods of time and you did, you ran for long periods of time. That's not helping you necessarily get that half step. Really what it comes down to, it's that fast twitch, right? And a lot of players now have moved away from those really intense Olympic lifts, and players are not loading their bodies as much because it's not great for you longevity wise to do
weight
that kind
and heavy
of stuff.
being heavy is not helpful, right?
It's not like you don't need to be healthy, like heavy anymore. Really, what you need to do is you need to be nimble, you need to be flexible, and you need to have that fast twitch. It was funny. There was one point in my career where I was often injured, and I had a hip issue that was like not great. But I finally went with this trainer, and he got me to a point where we were doing like really short bursts, and it seemed like the rest was like way too long. I'm like, man, we're resting a long time here, don't you think? And he's like, trust me. Like, and I kind of went through it, and even with a bad hip, I was like, I feel pretty good. Like I got something out of this, and I wish I did this sooner, where I wasn't really all messed up. So you can do it. A certain amount of it comes in the gym, and a certain amount of it comes from skating technique. One of the things that I learned along the way with Barb Underhill, especially, who's one of the best skating coaches in the league, is that if you're way too much on your inside edge, there's so much power and free glide that you're actually not getting. And you're just kind of, you can only be so fast. So with a little bit of, I guess, if you want to call it technique work or technical skating analysis, like you can actually find something there where you get a little bit of a free glide when you're actually up to speed. So I would say that, the fast twitch, you're going to get that in the gym. And then as far as skating technique, that's going to give you that open ice speed. And for Brock Boeser, yeah, you want a little more like right out of the gates for sure. I would like to see a little more out of the gates for him, but I would also like to see him like if he picks up speed with crossovers, there's no reason why a guy who's that size and that big can't be like free flowing, kind of flying through the wind once he gets going. Like he can be that. It's really he needs to find a way to channel that.
Did you get a double axle into your repertoire with Barb as well, or?
No, it was funny
never?
though.
No.
It was funny though. Every once in a while, we would be doing a drill, and she breaks things down so well, right? So you just start with the movement, and sometimes you'll do it stationary. Sometimes you'll kind of just shift your weight, right? And she builds it out from there. So you build it out from there where you do the movement down the ice, and then she'll build it out where you do the movement in a game kind of situation, like how you would do it in a game, and then you add a puck. And I would always throw like pucks her way. I'm like, okay, can you pass me the puck now? She's like, no, you don't understand. Like, I cannot pass you this puck. I said, yes, you can. Like, we can do it. Like, you can pass me this puck. And to her credit, she was putting them on the tape.
Well, it's funny. Out here, Victor Kratz, the Canadian Olympian, is a big time edge work guy out here, and he's actually pretty good with the stick. He's been able to. He must have played hockey at some point in his career, but the ice dancers and figure skaters are spectacular.
Hey, Jeff Skinner, former junior figure skater.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I grew up in Toronto, and Jeff Skinner's a year older than me. And I remember my dad just hammering home the fact that we all knew Jeff Skinner did figure skating in the minor hockey world. And some people were like, is it gimmicky? Like, is it kind of whatever? But my dad was always saying, like, no, dude, like, you got to work on skating. Skating is number one. It's awesome that he does that. And, you kind of see it now. Like, if you can't skate, you have very little chance of succeeding in this league. And it's almost gotten to the point where you describe players now and you say someone's a good skater. It's like, well, who isn't? So if you're saying someone's a good skater at this point, they got to be pretty remarkable. Like whether it's straight line speed or it's a really super mobile defenseman.
Back on the Boeser thing, does it detract or do people have a different assessment of? And I'm not saying there's not on ice issues with the skating, all that we've talked about, because it definitely is the case. And I'm not asking him to be different. I'm just saying, I think him being as stoic as he is also gives people the feeling that he's not interested in being here, that he's not giving it his 100%. And it's false, but I think it does put people down that boulevard that he doesn't have the fire that burns inside of him. And I think he does. I think he's got a big fire that burns inside of him to be better and to win and all that. But he's so stoic on the outside, I think it leads people down that road sometimes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think a lot of people, unless you're in the room and unless you know certain things from, inside sources, if you want to call it that, you know what you see on the bench, you know what you see on the ice, and really what you see is Brock Boeser. He doesn't show a lot of emotion, but I think that can work for players as well. Like, I kind of wish I was a little more stoic. I wish I didn't go back to the bench and show that I just had a bad shift or, there's certain players.
JT Miller could be a little more stoic.
Exactly. There's certain players that can have that and it works for them. And just even, thinking about, okay, like you want to go somewhere else because you want a new opportunity and that new opportunity doesn't present itself. You're like, okay, like I can make do over here. Actually, you start thinking about it. You're like, okay, wouldn't it be this sense of accomplishment and pride if I were to come back here, have a great year, I signed this contract here, and really live up to that and be like a key contributor to that team? Like, I think you go through certain phases as an athlete where you're like, okay, there's the door and that's going to be a good opportunity and I'll walk right out. That door closes. And I think as an athlete, you need that light at the end of the tunnel and you need something to push for. And maybe for Brock Boeser, it's going to be, well, I signed this contract here. I know I can be better. I know there's higher expectations based on what I make and what that value should be to the team. Like, maybe that's my sense of pride and accomplishment. And I would imagine, like a lot of athletes, they have that. Like, you don't get to that level without that fire and that desire to be the best you can possibly be. So I hope that for Brock Boeser, because he certainly can be. His rookie season, he scored that hat trick against us in Pittsburgh, and we were like, this guy's a serious goal scorer. Like, he is a stud, and I hope he gets back to that this year.
We're watching a Stanley Cup final where the best skater on each team forced their way out of their previous team in Matthew Tkachuk and Jack Eichel. You read the insider trading headlines this week. Alex DeBrincat, who I'm not sure ever wanted to be traded from Chicago to Ottawa, has let the Senators know he's not signing there long term. And then there's Pierre-Luc Dubois, who apparently just wants to play for the Montreal Canadiens. We're going to see more of this, Frank? Are players with that sort of clout going to be more and more likely to dictate the teams that employ them?
Does Alex DeBrincat have clout? Like, he's a nice player,
well,
but come on, clout?
40 goals.
I know.
So.
He's a two-time 40-goal scorer. He had I guess if you want to call it a down year last year. And both those players actually can improve more. Like, it's not like those players are not Matthew Tkachuk. Like, they're nice players. Alex DeBrincat's a nice scoring winger who does well on the power play, and when positioned with the right centerman, can score at 5-on-5. I don't think he scored enough at 5-on-5 this season. Pierre-Luc Dubois, as you guys know, big, strong centerman, has some tenacity and sandpaper. Does he play like that every night? No, he doesn't. Like, there's games where you watch the Jets and you're like, where is he? Like, where'd he go? That's the guy that I just saw 2 weeks ago going toe-to-toe against another centerman, shoving him in the face after whistles. Like, I haven't seen that for 2 weeks.
And there's not a ton of bottom line either. Not a ton of bottom line. Like, he's not going to be winning your team scoring lead.
Well, he's not. He hasn't hit a point per game yet in his career. He's never been over 50% in the faceoff dot over his career. So, like, I understand that these players want to dictate their terms. And I guess, given that Matthew Tkachuk was able to do it, there's nothing wrong with kind of giving teams a heads up. I'm not going to sign here long term. Let's kind of cut bait here as soon as we possibly can. And I guess, from a team's point of view, you would appreciate the heads up before it gets to the point where you're going to lose that player for nothing, and you can find a way to recoup some kind of assets from it. But both those players, like someone asked me today at TSN, who's the more attractive trade candidate for you? And I went back and forth with it a little bit. I'm like, okay, high-scoring winger, like really high ceiling there. And I'm like, well, Pierre-Luc Dubois is a centerman that a lot of teams would love to have. Like, that's, we're seeing it in the playoffs right now, where Vegas has a lot of that kind of genetic makeup of a player, but it doesn't do it all the time. So I said Pierre-Luc Dubois is probably more of an attractive trade piece for me, because it seems like you need to have that strength down the middle, and you need to have someone that can play with that kind of element. Doesn't need to be a point per game per se, but needs to be able to put the puck in the back of the net and make things happen offensively, which he can. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that happen. It sucks that it's happening to Canadian teams, though. Like, that's the one constant theme. Happened to Calgary, it's happening to Winnipeg, going to happen to Ottawa. And it's unfortunate that it's happening to Canadian teams.
And Buffalo's a quasi-Canadian team in terms of Jack Eichel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's a border town, and I'm not sure it's the Edmonton of the USA. Put it that way.
Say this about the Jack Eichel thing. I actually have a lot of I appreciate what Eichel did more, because Eichel stood up for his health. And he said, I'm doing this surgery because I think this is best for my body, and I've consulted with some of the best doctors around the world, and I truly believe in that. And the team wasn't willing to go there, and the show goes on. But I would say this, like, players take their bodies very seriously because they understand that's their moneymaker.
Yeah.
It's not like they're making decisions on a whim here, going to see their family physician. Like, they're flying around to see the best doctors in the world. And sometimes the teams want you to go see their guy, and that's fine. Their guys are very good. But Jack Eichel believed in the process. He was willing to go down that route, and good for him, because it's paid off for him.
We're getting close to the NHL entry draft here, Frankie, and we wanted to ask you about a number of prospects here who could be available to the Vancouver Canucks at number 11 as we get closer to the draft at the end of the month, given your work on the CHL broadcast on TSN. Local kid here we're going to ask you about. He's out of the Burnaby Winter Club in St. George's, Kelowna Rockets winger Andrew Crystal. What do you make of him, and do you think he'd be available at number 11?
I would imagine so. I mean, like, Craig Button has talked about him all year long, and it seems like he's in that range, right? Like, he's right in that range where you think about guys like Quentin Musty and Nate Danielson. Like, It's going to be interesting because coming out of that top 3 or 4, and we've talked about this before, it just seems like a lot of them do blend together. But Kristall's a nice player. Like another nice player in there is like Brandon Yeager, who's more of like a sniper, and like I don't want to say like doesn't like drive the play as much, but he certainly is a sniper. Like there's a real offensive dimension to his game that's really nice. The player I think that could be a sleeper, if you want to call it that, is Quentin Musty out of Sudbury. It seems like he's that kind of player, if everything goes well in his career, that teams want to acquire later on. Like that big hulking guy who can score goals and can use his body really well. And like I think if you look at where he's ranked right now, like I think Craig has him at 21 or 22.
Yeah.
Like that's a player that you look back at drafts historically, like there's always that one guy. It's that Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson was picked way earlier than people thought, but I think the Washington Capitals have been pretty happy with the fact that they got him. Musty's not Wilson. Like he's not going to be the toughest guy. He's not a fighter by any stretch. I know he has fought this year. He had a good fight with Callum Ritchie actually at one point in the OHL, and like I think Musty got the better of that. But that's like a candidate for me that I wouldn't be surprised, even if he's ranked 22, 23, like he could go in those mid-teens and maybe even make a little bit of a push higher. I know going back to my draft, Mark Scheifele, I believe at 7, was a little off the board at the time. Like I think people had Scheifele later on in that draft, but Winnipeg likes the player. They go out and get him, and they've gotten a lot of good years out of Mark Scheifele. So there's just a few different elements. It's going to be like, what is Vancouver going to be looking at? And with all things being equal, right? Like who does the tie go to for the Canucks? Does the tie go to a playmaker? Does the tie go to a scoring winger? Does it go to a power forward, or does it going to go to a defenseman? So
it's been a big debate here that most people think best player available has to be thrown out the window because they've got two excruciating positions of need, and that is blue line and center, and that it would have to be something extraordinary for a winger to be chosen.
Exactly. That's exactly, like it would have to be. I can't fathom this player is still there. Someone made a mistake. Because if there's two good defensemen, like if Reinbacher and Sandin Pellikka are still there, I don't know how the Canucks can pass on both those players.
Matvey Michkov at 11 would be interesting.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're talking about Michkov, and even then, I'm not sure because they're an impatient group and he's not available till 26. To me, I think the only winger that would fall there would be the local kid Benson from the Winnipeg Ice, where you go, okay, we can't believe the value. We can't believe he's there. We know it's not our position.
And he's played center. You might be able to refashion him as a center as well. How about, is it reaching for Riley Heidt? We saw him, we did a game together with Prince George involved. What do you think of Riley Heidt?
I really liked him. Actually, last year, watching him as a 16-year-old, I was so impressed with how much responsibility he had taken on as a 16-year-old. It's hard. Like, it's hard to be a penalty killer and a power play guy and play top minutes. Like, it really takes a special player to be able to do that and have success at it. I was a big fan of his last season. And then when you and I did the game together this year, I was a big fan again. And he seems like one of those guys. Like, he'll be a late first-round pick. That kind of seems like the ballpark he's going to be in. But I think a team is going to be really happy. Like whoever gets him is going to be a happy team because he does play in all situations. He's very reliable. He can make plays. Like he's a great passer, and like he plays with that kind of engine. He plays with that motor that teams are looking for, where he doesn't go hiding ship to ship. Like he's always kind of there in the middle of things. I think he's been like, for him to kind of come in and do what he did right away as a 16-year-old. And then continue that throughout his progression has been really, really impressive.
Had a great Hlinka Gretzky as well. 6 points in 5 games.
We should mention Quentin Musty plays for the Sudbury Wolves, Blake.
You think it was
like our boy here?
Yeah,
Sudbury loyal. He's big nickel loyal.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure.
We like to promote the Wolves. Hey, it takes a special kind of person to go up to Sudbury at 16-year-old.
Spend 4 years in Sudbury.
Yeah.
At
Also,
16 years old.
Also, think about this. Like, Quentin Musty's an American kid.
That's
he could
true.
He could have gone to the program, and he was like, no, I'm going to Sudbury first overall.
Yeah,
See you there.
That's a choice.
You like that character, right? He's
love
going to work
that.
for it. Exactly.
That is. I wouldn't be surprised if after practice he went down to the mine and did a little part-time work, little nickel mining. That's the kind of toughness Sudbury breeds.
And he didn't use a cart. He put the rocks on his shoulders and carried them out of the mine.
He was like Sting in the Simpsons episode where the kid falls down the well.
Exactly.
Well done, Frank. Great to have you back. We'll catch up next Thursday.
Thanks, guys.